Hello, Dr. Schooley here, current president of the Florida Interest Network of AAMFT. I'm thrilled to introduce to you today Barbara Kelly, Dr. Barbara Kelly, licensed psychologist out of Winter Park, Florida, who is going to present today on collaborative divorce. She has quite the interesting background. We'll have to have her back sometime so I can just interview her for how in the world she got from 15 years as a forensic psychologist working with sex offenders to working with collaborative divorce. I'm sure that's an interesting journey. But Barbara, I thank you for presenting this evening, and I turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you, Anna. Give me 1 minute here. I'm going to share my screen with everybody and get my PowerPoint up for you. So give me 1 second. Get you started. There we
Excellent.
go. Can I see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So as Anna said, I'm a licensed psychologist. I have spent the last, good 15 years working with families where there was some kind of court or legal involvement for some reason or the other. And in the course of that became really exclusively focusing on families and conflict resolution for families, and really coming from the perspective of helping families transition through a number of different kind of conflicts or life phases of a relationship, including providing premarital services and marital therapy, transitioning during divorce and post-divorce high conflict. So one of the pieces of that is helping families transition divorce, and the predominant focus for me is out-of-court settlement. And one of those out-of-court settlement processes that I know that you're going to have a speaker coming up, a lawyer, family law attorney speaking about, and I'll leave you on this cliffhanger who will talk about this more, but is collaborative divorce. And collaborative divorce involves clients having the opportunity to be the decision maker. The collaborative divorce is a client-driven process where the family receives a neutral mental health professional. They receive a neutral financial professional. Each spouse or partner has a lawyer, and everyone signs an agreement saying, we're going to solve this divorce. We're going to come up with a durable agreement that meets the interests and needs of the clients and the family without going into a courtroom in an adversarial way. If either client decides that they want to go in a courtroom and have a third party, an arbiter or a judge, make a decision for them in an adversarial way, they lose the entire team. So we would create a system to assist them through their divorce, and we work together. But I know you'll get some more information on how that works in your next seminar. The focus for me today is how can we as mental health professionals, how can you as a licensed marriage and family therapist assist clients through the divorce process and understand their needs and what do they need from you? And you might be asking yourself, why this topic? You know, why would I want to spend time with marriage and family therapists talking about divorce? Well, that's because I think that divorce by definition is a systems process. It doesn't happen to an individual, it happens in the context of a system. Nobody gets divorced from themselves. They get divorced from a partner, from their spouse, and divorce involves the system between spouses, between parents and children, extended family, social systems, church systems, all those pieces. So I'm just gonna, so that's why I feel like the topic is of interest for this group, and why I like to talk to licensed marriage and family therapists about this topic. In terms of handouts, I've provided Anna with 6 handouts. One are the PowerPoint slides. The other are resources that I'll refer to during this presentation so that you'll have those resources and you can spend some time getting more information if you want to after the presentation. And we will leave some time for questions at the end, and Anna will help me with that. So again, why this topic? In addition to it being a systems process and a systems issue, I think that despite our best efforts, divorce will happen, and maybe sometimes should happen for families. How we care for adults and children during and after the divorce process, I think, is critical to post-divorce adjustment, meaning the emotional well-being of everybody involved, not just divorcing spouses, but their children and extended family. I think it's critical to what future intimate relationships look like for the system, for the spouses, for their children, extended family relationships, and overall success in life going forward. We have some pretty solid data now about what children need in order to move forward in a healthy way. I also believe that families are cornerstones in our community. And so ultimately, how we care for people in the divorce process is really about caring about the health of our communities going forward. So my goals for today are really to explore some models that can inform our work as mental health professionals when we're working with divorcing adults. And that's where I'm going to focus today, on those divorcing adults. And I picked 4 areas today. These are just different areas that I think I've found helpful information to pull from when I'm working with divorcing parents. And they're bodies of literature that do offer some really good, helpful information about understanding the needs of divorcing people. And so the first area I want to look at is attachment theory. We'll talk about that a little bit. The second area is life impacts. And this is really more my own brain's conceptualization, and I'm sure many of you have conceptualized in similar ways, but I'm just going to walk through that model that I use when I'm working with clients to think about their strengths and weaknesses and their needs and their resources and what I need to provide for them. And then I want to look at the decision-making and negotiation literature. And this is pulling from people who negotiate, like between countries and businesses and other high conflict situations, but I think there's some really good information that we can pull from and understand. There's also a form of mediation called insight mediation that really, the underlying theory for that mediation is a systems perspective, and so I'll try and touch base on that. And then the final area is dignity and the role of dignity when we're working with families who are divorcing and in conflict resolution. And this I'm pulling from the work of Dr. Donna Hicks. I don't know if you've heard of her before, but we'll take a few minutes and talk about her work as well. Some of these topics we'll be able to take a little deeper dive into, but overall I'm going to be moving pretty fast in the time we have. And I hope that at a minimum I've exposed you to some new information or some new ways to think about some old information and a curiosity to pursue it further. So I'll just move on into attachment theory and just ask you to think for a minute, what is attachment? We use that word a lot. It's a word we all know what we mean intuitively. We've studied it, but when it comes down to it and you have to put it into words, how might you put that into words? And so before I sort of share my thoughts on that, I wanted to share a little interaction between Pooh and Piglet that I thought was sort of a reflection of how I think attachment might feel. And so in this image, Piglet sidled up to Pooh from behind. "Pooh," he whispered. "Yes, Piglet." "Nothing," said Piglet, taking Pooh's paw. "I just wanted to be sure of you." So what is attachment? It's that deeply enduring bond that we have with another person. A deeply enduring bond. It exists beyond time and space. Think about that childhood friend or that really good friend that you haven't seen in a really long time, and you pick up the phone and you talk to them, or you have a chance to see them in person, and you just pick right back up and it feels like going home and you're connected. That's an attachment. Think about those military reunions that we all love to see. We see clips on the news, on YouTube, on Facebook, and a child who has not seen a parent in a long time may not even have had the opportunity for video contact, depending on where they were stationed and what branch of the service they're in. And they see that parent, and just the emotion, that child has not lost that attachment. That attachment is still there. Attachment does not have to be reciprocal. There's that age-old concept of unrequited love, right? In the dependency work that I've done in the past, I've interviewed and evaluated children in the dependency system due to founded abuse. And I can't tell you how many children really have conveyed in one way or the other that they love and are attached to a parent who may not be attached or bonded to them in return. And I have had children say to me, especially children who have been re-abused in foster care, who have said to me, I'd rather be abused by somebody I love and I loves me, somebody I'm attached to, than somebody I'm not. There's something critical about that attachment. And we all know that attachment was first identified between mothers and infants, but later we learned and we know that adults form attachments too. And one of the places adults form those attachments, those important attachments, is within the context of those adult intimate relationships, our marriages, our long-term partners and spouses. And so I think attachment theory is rich with useful information for us as mental health professionals working with families. But for our purposes today, I want to focus on adult attachment in the context of divorce and what we can kind of pull from attachment theory to help us work with those divorcing adults. So looking at the attachment categories, and I know there's different, sometimes different labels in the literature. These are the 4 that I'm going to use today: secure attachment, ambivalent, avoidant, and disorganized. And I want to just kind of highlight for a minute how these attachment styles differ in some significant ways, and then talk about each characteristic, how we might think about people who fall in these attachment categories in terms of how they come to divorce. So the way that these attachment styles differ that we might want to think about when we're thinking about divorcing adults is these attachment styles differ in terms of how individuals perceive and deal with closeness and emotional intimacy. Their ability to communicate their emotions and needs and listen to the emotions and needs of their partners. And this is important, you know, when we think about marital work, but also in divorce work, because part of helping a family transition and develop a durable agreement for their family, a co-parenting relationship, and an ongoing ability to parent their children relies to some degree on each person being able to effectively communicate their needs and their emotions and hear the other person's interests and needs and emotions. Their modes of responding to conflict differ, and their expectations about their partner and the relationship. And that's that internal model that we have, that we carry around, our internal working model of relationships that's critical to our attachment. So kind of thinking about that, I want to then sort of briefly talk about what characteristics we might think about in each of these. And I've put a chart in your handouts or in your PowerPoint. And this chart is really, there's a lot of information in here, but it's really just limited by my PowerPoint abilities. So I did the best I could to kind of put the graph on there. With the idea of anxiety being across sort of the top axis and avoidance on that side axis, and we can think about each of these attachment categories in terms of anxiety and avoidance. And I'm just going to speak about a few key characteristics that I think we can hone in on when we're thinking about divorce. The securely attached person is happy, they're able to be empathetic in their relationship and responsive and feel accepted and be vulnerable. In that ambivalent attachment category, where there's a higher level of anxiety, maybe a lower level of avoidance, these are individuals who are overly concerned or overly dependent. They can be clingy. They're overly concerned about their spouse's thoughts and views. They may be seeking approval and have that anxiety around whether, you know, does he love me? Does he not? When we look at that avoidant attachment category, these are individuals that show up more independent, do not readily show their emotions, and tend to exhibit a sense of maybe a higher view of themselves and a lower view of others. I don't know for you who are listening, but in my practice, I'm hearing more and more spouses coming in talking about their other spouse in terms of using this word narcissistic. And sometimes I think this is the attachment category it may get applied to. Whether it's accurate or not accurate, I think sometimes thinking about people in terms of their attachment characteristics is relevant to us sorting out how we might move forward with that person, what their needs might be, or how we can coach that person if we're working with them. The last category is disorganized attachment, and these folks tend to be more independent. They tend to see themselves as more helpless. They want closeness, but they're scared of it, and they expect to be hurt, and they may have a fear of attachment. So just kind of putting that, and you have that chart for your references going forward. I want to just comment on behavioral systems to think about. I think can be familiar with these in children. You know, when they're when that exploratory system's activated, they're curious, they're active, they're out there checking things out until a stranger comes into the environment. They feel tired or hurt or scared, and then that fear system pops up and they run back to their attachment person for reassurance, to help them feel better, help them feel reassured, feed them, soothe them, those kinds of things. So I want to just think about that for a minute, and then we'll pull that forward and think about how we can think about that with adults going through divorce. When we think about adult attachment, there's 3 types of situations that are likely to activate an attachment behavior, the attachment system in divorce: stressful conditions in the social or physical environment, threat to the future of the attachment relationship, or conditions within the individual such as ill health. And so certainly a threat to the future of attachment relationship would be a divorce or the threat of a divorce. So what might that look like for adults? And what can we do? In general, even though we know each client is different and unique, there are some general things that we can do that I want to talk about. So attachment theory tells us the following. We want to learn as much as possible about the client's perspective of their needs, their feelings, their values, and their desires. And one way this becomes important during the divorce process is, again, a client needs to be able to articulate that to their spouse and or to their lawyer. In a collaborative divorce process, which is an interest-based process, they're going to set goals where they're going to be able to have the opportunity to articulate that and have the team try to meet those needs. We want to validate the client's emotional experience for them. We as professionals may talk to many people who've gone through this experience, or may understand that many people feel the same things that our client is, but our clients don't always know that, and they benefit from that validation. We want to reflect acceptance of the client and also an expectation of a little bit more from them than they may think they're currently capable of, so that we also offer that hope and are those holders of hope for them. We want to be sensitive to any rupture in our relationship with the client, because we may become that transitional attachment person for them, that holding environment for them, and be willing to do repair work with them if we need to. We want to be willing to comfort them, but also to set appropriate limits for the interaction. It's going to be important. So essentially, we try to become their holding environment. If clients participate in a collaborative divorce, the team will become that holding environment for them, that holder of hope for them. So thinking in terms of the behavioral systems, what we want to do is reduce the fear behavioral system and activate that exploratory behavioral system. When you think about it in terms of divorce, people who are entering a divorce because their spouse has initiated it, and they're in that place of intense grief, they're looking back in the past and trying to make sense of it, and they're not in a place where they can look forward to the future. They're not feeling secure enough, or that they have enough of a sense of their own emotional equilibrium to really picture what the future could be like. And so when that all comes from a fear-based place. As we can shift them from that fear-based place to more of an exploratory place where they can begin to consider options. They don't have to settle on anything, but I can start to explore options of what things could look like or how they could be different. One of the ways I came to this and started to maybe think and explore this a little bit more is I had 2 very sort of, I guess, seminal experiences in my practice as a psychologist. On 2 separate occasions and some amount of time apart, I had treated 2 clients for some pretty severe trauma, one childhood and one contemporaneous, very severe trauma. And they came through that trauma, they responded to treatment well and successfully resolved trauma in that treatment. And we terminated, and they went on with their lives. And in each of these cases, a few years later, the patient came back because her spouse had initiated a divorce. And I had expectations of working through that divorce similarly to maybe how we had worked through their prior trauma. But these were different people. They looked very different during this divorce process. And I believe it's because at that point, their attachment system was activated, and they were fearful of losing that primary attachment. And when we worked together before on the trauma, they had that benefit of that strong attachment that with their spouse, and their spouse provided a holding environment that was important and relevant for them before. So knowing that now, I want to kind of shift down into thinking about each of these attachment categories specifically. And if we have some idea of what attachment category our client's in, how can we help them and coach them through the process? So I'm going to refer to an article which I've also provided to Anna for your handouts for you to have as a resource, called Attachment Informed Collaborative Process by Dr. Vallette and Yuval Berger. And this article was published in the Collaborative Review, which is the journal for the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals. Okay, so during the separation process, I'm just sort of talk about the avoidant, the ambivalent, and the disorganized for our purposes today. When we're working with someone whose primary attachment style is an avoidant attachment style, we are going to want to work with them to help them see the benefit of support for the whole system, for the family. You know, oftentimes the spouse may be asking for counseling or co-parenting therapy or some other kind of intervention or resource for the family, and this client may not see a need, and we want to help them see the need. Even if they don't value it, it may be of value to other family members. We can help them do that sometimes by highlighting the transactional nature of the negotiation process, helping them see that there may be some financial benefit or some other benefit in terms of a need that they have for acknowledging their spouse's wishes and concerns. We want to remind them about their tendency to devalue emotional needs, knowing that those may be important to their spouse, and that they are going to feel we're asking them to over communicate about the children. They're just going to feel pushed that way, and we just want to acknowledge that for them and help them see the value in that. For the ambivalent attachment category, the individual with an ambivalent attachment, we can coach their attorney that some physical proximity in the seating arrangement is going to be helpful to that person. So when they have settlement meetings, or if it's a collaborative meeting with the full team there, having the attorney sit in proximity to their client versus across the table or further away is going to be helpful for this client to feel supported. We want to help them when they're overwhelmed with emotion to organize their narrative and help them prioritize their goals. They're going to have difficulties with that. That can show up in their support system. And these folks tend to overwhelm their support system. And so we want to help them identify where are those critical places that you can express emotion and work through your thoughts and feelings, and how can you preserve your social relationships and your support system and not burn them out. And also down the road, when emotion lessens and gets a little bit more manageable, we want to help them avoid sharing inappropriately in places that they're going to regret later. We also will have to reassure them that their lawyer has their back. So if we have the opportunity to speak with the lawyer, coaching the lawyer in ways that they can show to the client that yes, they have their support, because this client may perceive that the lawyer is not supporting them, even if the lawyer is. The last attachment category I want to talk about is disorganized. These folks that fall in this category are the ones that I tend to worry about the most, just in terms of really making sure I'm monitoring psychological status. Folks with the disorganized attachment category can be highly anxious and highly avoidant. It's that approach avoidance that can be confusing to their spouse when their spouse is trying to figure out what their needs are, and they will need clarification. We want to help them understand that is confusing to their spouse, which in turn makes them feel like they get mixed messages. As a therapist for this individual, it's important that we act consistently, that we be a source of safety. We are as calming and soothing and reassuring. We also need to be proactive and actively engage them, because remember, they're going to show up with some avoidance or may have some avoidance about showing up. We also want to monitor their psychological status, and I proactively will ask these folks if they are having any thoughts of harm, of giving up, or those kinds of things for sure. I want to share with you an image. Some of you may have seen this before, I don't know. But I think this is a nice image of what the therapist can help a client do during a divorce where things are jumbled and a mess. And we just kind of help them identify thoughts, identify feelings, clarify their priorities and their needs so that they can more effectively advocate for themselves and communicate during a divorce process and with their spouse. Okay. So now I'm going to shift topics, and I'd like to shift to life impacts. And so life impacts are really, this is just me talking, and many of you may have organized your thoughts in a similar way, but I'm just going to sort of talk about my thoughts around how I think about this when I have a client who is in a divorce process or working through that. So I think about, what is divorce really? And divorce is a legal term, and so we all may think about divorce as a legal process. For most people, I think divorce is an emotional process, but it's not just an emotional process. The emotional process may begin with a legal process when you get served, but typically it begins with one spouse before the other, where they've struggled with the problems in the marriage, they've struggled with different solutions before they decide that divorce is the solution they want to proceed with. Divorce impacts all areas of a person's life. So it's not just an emotional process nor a single event. It's not like a haircut where we all can say, I'm going to get a haircut tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Divorce happens over time and in different areas of our life. So the 6 domains I think about are the emotional, social, physical, spiritual, financial, and legal. In terms of the emotional divorce, that is that grief process, grieving that a connection with your spouse and the loss of that relationship. Many people will grieve and detach from their spouse, but stay married because of their emotional investment in the concept of their marriage and the picture of life and what they want to provide for their children. And so many people also then have a secondary grief process around the loss of that family unit or that family life for their children, and not just them. So it's that grief process. The social divorce refers to that change in identity. When we're married, we tend to form friendships with other married couples. When we're married with children, we tend to form friendships with other married couples with children. And as people go through a divorce, they struggle a little bit with their identity. Friends can pull away because the emotional intensity of the divorce is too much for them. Many married couples may pull away because of pressure around taking sides, some fears around being too involved or just setting boundaries, or people will take sides. And as close as individuals may be to their in-laws, oftentimes in-laws end up taking sides as well. I will say one of the benefits that I found in the collaborative divorce process is we do address those issues. I've had many cases where I have older, say 50 or up, spouses divorcing, and one spouse may be the primary caretaker for the other spouse's aging parents. And we certainly are able to work through those relationships in a more amicable way and continue to provide support for those aging parents in a way that they're used to. The physical divorce refers to the actual physical separation, and not just the sex part, but affection, having another person in the house that you can talk to, have a casual dinner with, the sense of security of having another person in the house, and a task partner. Years ago, I remember reading an article that indicated that the number one item women buy when their male partner moves out of the house is a security system, whether it's an actual electronic security system or a big dog or a gun or some kind of weapon. But again, just that sense of security is part of that physical divorce. And for some people, that's overwhelming enough that that also is a reason they struggle with a divorce decision. The spiritual divorce can be internal in terms of struggling with the vows that you made, feeling abandoned by God. It can also be around the family presence in a church or other house of worship, and who gets the 10 o'clock service on Sunday and who gets the Saturday night or Friday night service. It can also be how you feel in terms of still fitting in that religious environment. I've certainly had clients that felt like they were no longer going to be welcome, or they felt uncomfortable, and that was a struggle. The financial divorce is that division of assets, It can involve child support or alimony. It can involve a loss of retirement planning, which can be important for many people. It can involve a shift from being a stay-at-home spouse or parent to working part-time, or from part-time to full-time. It can also mean, having two homes is more expensive than one. And so there can be shifts in terms of kids being in private school or going to public school or other things along those lines. And then finally, the legal divorce, which is being in a lawyer's office for the first time, perhaps, or a courtroom, or filing legal documents, and all the ways that the law may look at what's important and what's not important, which may be different than what the family looks at as important or unimportant. One of the examples that always jumps out for me along these lines is that I think most families do not look at their pet dog as property, but the law looks at the pet dog as property, for example. And so again, when we look at out-of-court settlement or divorce processes where we're helping clients really reach decisions on their own, we can look at how we can handle that pet that is a part of the family and that everybody has a relationship with, including the children. And so along these lines, when you're thinking about these domains, then you can think about, where does your client have resources already? Where are their strengths? Where are their needs? And what can we offer them? Do we need to get them in with a financial advisor, or someone who does some kind of concierge service to help somebody who hasn't had to set up automatic bill pay before, or help separate the finances when that feels overwhelming? Do they need help with the kids, help with moving, faith-based help or healing, referral to a good lawyer, data or information about what their kids' needs might be, those kinds of things. There's lots of good support groups and divorce recovery groups in our communities. And so as therapists, being aware of those and knowing where to help our clients get to along those lines. Okay. So now I want to shift to negotiation and conflict resolution. So before, especially during and after divorce, particularly a divorce involving minor children, there are numerous demands for decision-making, negotiation, and resolving conflict. Oftentimes, spouses are in different places for this decision-making and negotiation process. The spouse who may have been working on this divorce first, who is more detached, more further along the grief process, may be in a more logical place, may be able to approach things from a more dollars and cents point of view. They may be more forward-looking and have a better idea of what they're sort of hoping for in the future. The other spouse could still be further back in that grief process, maybe even looking into the past and trying to still negotiate reconciliation. Their emotions are going to be closer to the surface, maybe stronger, and more likely to influence their ability to see a future and influence their decision making. And this always becomes a concern, because when people are making decisions based on emotions that we know are going to change, when we're working with people in divorce, we worry about how are they going to feel about those decisions as emotions change and resolve. And so again, looking at an out-of-court settlement process, again, such as a collaborative process, sometimes we can offer a spouse time to step out and work with their therapist, or just have the time that they need to get in a better place to make some of these decisions. There's some really interesting data that we can look at in terms of decision-making style. And I want to pull from a couple different places and just share some information with you. So if we go to the behavioral economics literature and we look at some of the studies that have been done, there was an interesting study where the researchers asked spouses to list all the reasons they love their spouse. And then after they listed all the reasons they love their spouse, they asked them to rate on a scale how much they loved their spouse. And there were two groups in this study. And one group got a piece of paper with 10 lines to fill in terms of listing all the reasons they love their spouse. And the other group got a piece of paper with only 3 lines to write in how much they love their spouse. So in the end, there was actually a significant difference between the two groups in terms of how much they said they love their spouse. And so I wish right now I could poll you and see which group you were guessing, but I will give you the answer. 3 reasons is the right amount of reasons to ask people to list how much they love their spouse, because the people that had the 3 lines significantly rated that they love their spouse more than the people with 10 lines. And if you're curious, at some time, can investigate that a little bit more, and we could talk about that a little bit more. We don't have time today. The other sort of piece that I want to talk about is, and so the part of that that's important is our brains can be influenced more than we think by our environment. Sometimes how we as therapists may frame up questions, and the environment that spouses that people put their brains in. So when we're under stress, it is really hard to hear and understand the other person. Clients can't process and store new information the way they usually can. And we can coach lawyers also to understand that, and we can help clients understand that. The most susceptible part of our bodies to stress, in my opinion, really is our brain. I think that's where it shows up. I'm sure we all feel stress in many parts of our bodies, but I would love to take a poll during divorce of how many people have fender benders or lock themselves out of their house or something like that. So a few tips around managing the impact of stress to the brain that we can help clients with when we're working with them. We do better when we can predict adverse events. The Harvard Stress Lab has done a number of studies. Of course, I'm going to give you a study with lab rats. They put lab rats, two groups, A and B, in cages. And the bottom of the cage, the floor of the cage, had the ability to give an electric shock to the feet of the rats. And so there were two groups, group A and group B. The only difference between group A and group B is that the group A rats had a light bulb that went off before the shock was administered. Both groups of rats received a shock of the same duration and intensity and frequency. But group A had a light that went off, so they knew when the shock was going to happen. At the end of the study, the researchers went back and examined the rats for physiological signs of stress. The rats in group A showed significantly less physiological signs of stress than the rats in group B. So having the ability to know when an adverse event happened resulted in less physiological signs of stress. So in a divorce process, if we pull from that and that body of research, if we can help clients become better informed and help them ask for what they need, help them not make assumptions, identify where their concerns are or where they're making assumptions, and help them ask for that information in an assertive way, not aggressively or not being passive, we can help them do better in the process and reduce their overall physiological experience of stress. For example, if they need a lawyer, if they have legal questions, refer them to a lawyer where they can get concrete examples. Help them organize their thoughts to speak with a spouse or extended family. Help them clarify their questions, identify who they need to ask those questions of, help them address their fears and the unknowns. Circling back to the brain and how it's influenced, we also can help clients understand that what they expose themselves to will also impact how they feel. There's a waiting room study. I call it the waiting room study. There's probably a better word for it. And this study utilized college students. And the study essentially told students they were there for a memory study. And so the students were given a list of words. They had to sit in a waiting room, memorize the words, and what was their time, they were called back. They were tested on how well they memorized the words. And then they had a second sort of an exit interview, which was to ask them to evaluate their experience in the study. There were two groups. One group memorized a list of words that had negative connotations, and the other memorized a list of words that had positive connotations. At the end, in the exit interview, even though the students all sat in the same waiting room, had the same length of wait, the students who had to memorize negatively connotated words rated their experience as longer, more uncomfortable, more negative than the students that had to memorize positive words. So we know this as therapists in terms of self-talk, but helping our clients really understand self-talk, that there's a difference between friends and trusted people that you can express your feelings to, that can give you good feedback, that can be empathetic, versus people that you might go to that might fuel revenge fantasies or focus on getting involved in that negative talk that may not be good for them. There's one other piece that's important when we think about negotiating divorce and making decisions in a divorce, which is that concept of emotional override. You know, from a legal perspective, in many respects, divorce is a math problem. There's equitable distribution, We divide it 50-50, it's a math problem, and people get stuck. There is certainly literature that says sometimes when we get triggered that something isn't fair, that overrides our ability to make a decision that might be in our best interests. And so the stranger studies have been conducted over time, many, many times, and replicated. They originated some time ago. They were replicated again with functional MRIs and have been replicated in different forms. So essentially in these studies, there's two strangers, they don't know each other, and one is in a room and has money. So let's say it's $10 in the study. The other stranger is going to come in, and so stranger A has the opportunity to offer stranger B some, all, or none of the money that they have, and stranger B has the opportunity to accept or decline the offer. And so from a math problem, stranger B, all they have to do is say yes, and even if it's just $1, they leave $1 richer. What the study showed was that if stranger B felt that the offer was unfair, they would oftentimes decline it. And P.S., if you're going to offer someone an unfair deal, don't do it with an audience, because the presence of an audience enhances a person declining an offer that they don't see as fair. When functional MRIs came into place, they could clearly identify that the emotional part of the brain became active and really could override rational decision making. So again, in a divorce where people are triggered, where they maybe feel like they've been treated unfairly or betrayed, that emotional decision making may override making good decisions sometimes. Last thing I want to say about that is just kind of shifting to, I mentioned insight mediation. It's really a systems approach to mediation, I think. The mediator focuses on threats and perceived threats. This model suggests that people defend and develop a defense story in response to the threat, but they usually don't disclose that threat. And so we sort of focus on getting to that threat. And the sense of fairness is the defend story. And so we just need to get underneath that. When people say that's not fair, what's underneath that for people that they're interested in? Which brings me to the next part, which is interest-based negotiation. And this is core to the collaborative process and other out-of-court settlement processes. And I'm going to just say a few words about what interest-based negotiation is. Interest-based negotiation is not asking for 100 because you think you ultimately want to get to 50. It's really being clear about what's important to you. And so the example I use, there's an orange here, and I use the example of two moms in a kitchen, each in their kitchen, and their kids are fighting over the last orange in the fruit bowl. And positional bargaining mom, traditional negotiation mom walks in the kitchen, and she says to the children, what's going on? And they say, well, we're fighting over the last orange, and I should have the last orange because I helped you carry in the groceries, and so I should have the last orange. And the other child says, I should have the last orange because he or she, my sibling, got the last orange last time. So what does positional bargaining or typical negotiation mom do? She grabs the nearest knife, she cuts the orange in half, and each child gets half, right? And so at the end of this negotiation, each child got half of what they want, so they're equally happy and equally unhappy. Fair, right? When we look at interest-based negotiation, what we're really trying to do is open the pie and meet more of the needs for both individuals involved in the negotiation. So what interest-based negotiation mom would say is to kid A, why do you want the orange? And kid A would say, I want the orange because dad made me orange juice from the orange this morning. It was so good, I'd like to make orange juice again. And interest-based negotiation mom will say to kid B, why do you want the orange? And kid B would say, because Mrs. Smith next door said if I brought her the orange, she could make zest out of the rind or the peel, and she would make my favorite orange cookies. So now interest-based negotiation mom can give both kids essentially 100% of what they want, because she can juice the orange for one child and give the other child the entirety of the peel. And that's really what we try to do in an interest-based negotiation process. And so again, helping clients understand that that's an option, because people don't always know how to separate or say goodbye or engage in those negotiations. Okay. So I want to shift to core concerns identified by Roger Fisher and Dan Shapiro. And these are from their conceptualization of dispute resolution and conflict resolution, core concerns are human wants, what humans that are important to them in almost every negotiation: appreciation, the desire to feel understood and honestly valued. And we know in negotiation, when that is conveyed, cooperation increases. When there's a mutual feeling of appreciation of each other, cooperation increases. So in a divorce, if if a stay-at-home mom spouse, for example, can say to her breadwinning husband, you know, I appreciate the lifestyle I've had. I wouldn't have had it had you not worked so hard. We have no debt going into this, and it's because you manage the money so well. Or if vice versa, the breadwinning spouse could say to the stay-at-home spouse, our kids are who they are today because of you. I know that. And that doesn't have to translate into money, but we know that cooperation increases when there's that mutual feeling of appreciation. Affiliation is a sense of connectedness with another group or person. And I think that comes into play in divorce and families when we talk about building affiliation around co-parenting going forward. Autonomy during negotiations, it's the freedom to affect or make our own decisions. And again, I think that's where collaborative is a helpful process, because we really do work to make sure that each spouse has a voice at the table and the ability to at least express and have freedom to make decisions without the imposition of the other. And we caution individuals how to do that without impinging on the other. Status is our standing in comparison to the standing of others. And status, we can invoke positive feelings in the other. We can invoke self-esteem when we create a positive sense of status. And negative emotions will rise out of competition of status. So if we can appreciate and respect each other's status, it's helpful. We see that again in terms of parenting roles. Sometimes somebody is looking for an acknowledgement of their status in the relationship through a financial reward, and we can sometimes address that better with words and move on in a better way. Role is ultimately choosing a fulfilling role that meets your needs. And for many people with a divorce, you're changing role. So this role of identity of stay-at-home mom, or the amount of time that you work, we really are asking people to make some shifts around that and help them understand that not all roles are permanent. What does life look like after a divorce? What are those role changes going to be? So sometimes it's just a matter of helping clients understand their needs around that, and that recognizing that it's not getting met and being unhappy about that is a normal reaction, and what we can do to help them with that. There's in your handouts, there's a chart called the risk of ignoring core concerns and the power of meeting core concerns. And I know I'm going a little quickly over this, but we're going to be short on time, but it's in there so you can look at kind of what each of these core concerns are, how people feel when they're not met, and how they feel when they are met, and the resulting feelings, and then how that might look like in a negotiation. I think it's a good handout for therapists to look at that. Again, we can help coach our clients. So the last thing I want to talk, and these are the references for you here if you would like to do a little bit more reading. Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury, Beyond Reason by Fisher and Shapiro, and Negotiating the Non-Negotiable by Dan Shapiro. All are good books, easy reads. Okay. I'm going to close by talking about the role of dignity. Dignity has an essential role in resolving conflicts. Dignity injuries are what are often at the bottom of intractable conflicts, things that we think could be resolvable, and why aren't they? And I wanted to take a minute just to talk about it, because I think we all know in our guts what dignity is, but it's hard to put it into words. And dignity is different than respect. Dignity is our birthright. It's treating others as if they matter and they're worthy of our care and attention. Earning respect means doing something that goes above and beyond the baseline of the right to be treated well. If we have earned respect, we have extended ourselves to others in an admirable way. Being present for our clients is a way of treating them with dignity. And I believe that anybody going through a divorce has had a dignity injury. either prior in the marriage, which is what caused them or part of the cause for them to initiate a divorce, or because a divorce was initiated. And as mental health professionals, treating our clients with dignity is one way we help them resolve and move forward from that injury. I mentioned Dr. Hicks. These are two of her books. If you're going to start with one, I would recommend Dignity, the Essential Role It Plays in Resolving Conflicts. And so these are in your PowerPoint slides as a reference. There's also two handouts. One is the Essential Elements of Dignity, in which she lists the areas where we can experience dignity injuries and where we experience dignity. And that's helpful for us, again, to kind of walk through when you're thinking about your client and where those injuries might be. The second handout, and lastly, I include this because working with clients who are experiencing a divorce and going through a divorce is really hard work. And we have to take care of ourselves as therapists, and sometimes that self-care is hard. I always kind of think if self-care was easy, we wouldn't all be trying to figure out how to be disciplined to take care of ourselves and engage in all that self-care. Self-care is a discipline. So the last handout really talks about temptations to violate one's own dignity. And I think that's a good one also for us to review as mental health professionals, ways that we might violate our own dignity or be tempted to when we reach that place of burnout or frustration. And so with that, I conclude my part of this presentation, and we'll open to any questions.
Okay. Barbara, thank you so much. I'm checking in chat and I don't see anything right now. I just wanted to say I really appreciate all the different theories and studies that you kind of put context around some of the ideas that you used. And I really appreciate that in other collaborative divorce presentations, there's been a lot of talk about what each of the members of the team do, and this was a really nice focus on what the therapist does. That sounds a great deal like therapy. Sounds like you're doing therapy, but what we're really doing, I think, is more like the coaching of coaching not only each member of the couple to be in a place where they can make their best decisions, but also coaching the other members of the team to assist the members of the couple. Am I on the right track?
You are 100% on the right track. One of the roles of the mental health professional on the collaborative team is to help with communication, managing emotions, and also really to coach the team in terms of meeting client needs and understanding things in a different way. Lawyers hear things through their lawyer ears and eyes, and financial professionals hear things through their financial ears and eyes. And we bring something unique to the table in terms of our skills, our ability, and our experience. And we hear things through our mental health ears and eyes. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes a conversation will happen between a couple and I will hear it completely differently. The lawyer, I could think of an example where we had a blow up around the alimony conversation. And what the lawyer heard is, we had a breakout and the professionals were speaking. And the lawyer heard, my client wants me to offer you a deal that I know your client's not going to take. And the financial professional saying, well, they're not that far apart. The numbers are apart. And I'm saying what I heard, that's the conversation I heard, was I'm angry because what I heard you, husband hearing, I'm angry because what I heard you say is if I was more generous, you wouldn't have to live with your boyfriend. And that's where he exploded. And so, we can translate that, and then using our good marital therapy skills, which again, it isn't marital therapy, but we're applying and bringing into the room what we know, is to ask everybody, do a little bit of coaching and ask everybody, based on now kind of us understanding what happened, how everybody's feeling, can we go in and rewind, do a little repair work and say that conversation didn't go the way anybody wanted it to, and can we try again?
Excellent. Yeah. So in a way, we serve as therapists, not to the couple, but to the entire team and couple. That it's the relationship between all of them that we are helping to manage. That's a really great. And of course, so all this stuff about dignity and about needs and all that kind of stuff applies to all of the team members as well as the couple. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep,
Well, I
exactly.
have a couple of Zoom chat questions. Is it possible for a partner who suffered dignity injury more likely to engage in emotional divorce while married? Yeah. So if that dignity injury happens prior to speaking of divorce, is that more likely to move them to want to do the emotional divorce? Certainly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think if I understand the question correctly, maybe what we're thinking about is that oftentimes when two spouses come to a divorce, the spouse who's on the sort of being left, there's a spouse that's initiated, and the spouse who's being left feels hurt, and maybe the spouse who made the decision to divorce didn't do it in all the ways that they could have, maybe in a way that was hurtful or traumatic for that person. But the person initiating the divorce often feels like they were hurt much earlier in the marriage, and that they tried all kinds of different things to resolve that and they couldn't resolve it. And so it became intolerable for them, and divorce became the option that they considered. And so, yes, a hurt often happens much earlier. And so that emotional divorce starts at a different time for each person.
Ah, interesting. So chances are they both suffer dignity injuries, but they're at different times, a different sequence. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Mhm.
So I've got Peter who says I assume he's doing a great deal of work with grieving families, and he appreciates the parallel between grief and divorce and the recognition of attachment theory as a base component. So thanks for that endorsement, Peter. Yeah, I don't know that I've ever heard um, uh, these particular theories that you've brought together, particularly about attachment, because certainly EFT, emotion focused therapy, is completely seated in attachment, adult attachment, and so why wouldn't divorce from that same system have a lot of those components? So yeah, that's really great. The other piece I really appreciated was the decision-making models. And the idea that only ask for 3 things rather than 10 things. That 3 things is more satisfying. I'm reminded of the research where 6 jams were offered versus 20 different kinds of jams, and the people were more satisfied who could only pick among the 6 jams. So too many options can actually lead to poor decision making or less satisfied decision making. But all of those decision making models I thought were really useful, because we tend not to think in those terms when we're doing our other clinical work. So that seems to fit, be so critical to this negotiation process that is to collaborative divorce. So that was really a great piece. I invite others. Rachel, now we have your correct name up. Rachel, if you had a question, or Peter, if you had a question, I invite you to ask it.
I have a question.
Yes, Meredith.
Uh, Barbara, could you address what I think some people experience in the process that's like decision fatigue?
Okay. Yep. So decision fatigue is a real thing. I know that everybody in this program experiences it, because you go home at the end of the day and just hope that someone else will decide what's for dinner for you, right? You don't have to decide. But we do ask people to make a lot of decisions. And I think that's one of the risks in some of our settlement or divorce processes, because people get to, they're spending an all day making a lot of decisions about their finances and their children, and you just get to that place where sometimes people throw their hands in the air and say, well, I'll just do this, because they're tired. So we want to, as part of, for example, a collaborative process, create space for people to recover and make decisions that are durable and they can live with, not because they're making it out of fatigue or exhaustion, or they feel worn down.
Thank you.
Yeah. Did that answer your question, Meredith?
It did.
It sounds like it's one of those things that as therapists we would need to be aware of, and maybe end a session and say that these decisions need to be picked up in the next session, rather than allow people to make decisions that they'll later regret. Or
Yep. So one of the options that we have in the collaborative process, there's two things that happen. There's an agenda for every meeting, where settlement meeting, where we're making decisions so everybody can be prepared. As a rule of thumb, we only schedule them for 2 hours. And we try to accomplish what we need to in that time, and then we take breaks. And so part of the mental health professional's role is to monitor how everybody's doing, and if we need to stop for a minute and check in with a client. And sometimes it's a matter of, someone's internal snow globe just got shooken up and they just need some time to walk around and let all that settle. Shift, walk around and come back to the table, or we just need to take a break and be able to think about it. So part of what the mental health professional will do on the front end is typically, at least what I will do, is get an idea of each spouse's decision-making style and what they need in order to make decisions the way they best make decisions.
Right. So in a very kind of general way, if someone is listening to this and knows nothing about collaborative divorce, where would you send them for sort of the basics? Is there a website or something to go to the basics?
Thank you for that question. So I would send them to the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, and their website is collaborativepractice.com. And that is the international organization. There are lots of good resources on that website. Most communities in Florida have a collaborative practice group, so you could also use your search engine and look for collaborative practice in your area, and there should be a practice group website that will also have more local information. In the handouts that I provided you is a handout for collaborative training that occurs twice a year at Berry Law School. And so certainly that website will have some information as well.
Okay, so we have reached time, and again, thank you very much, Barbara, for giving us your time today, and we look forward to more questions as they may pop up on our YouTube channel, and we may have you come back to give us part 2 if that makes sense. I thank you to everyone who attended this evening, and have a good evening and stay well.